Margaret took a deep breath as she opened the door to her small apartment. The creak of the rusty hinge echoed down the silent hallway, reminding her once again of the loneliness that awaited her. At 68, she bore the marks of a life full of challenges and disappointments on her face. Her eyes, once bright and full of hope, now reflected a weary resignation. The apartment, like its occupant, seemed to have lost its shine over the years. The walls, once a vibrant yellow, now displayed a faded and sad hue. Old and worn-out furniture occupied the few square meters of the space, silent witnesses to the nights when Margaret stayed awake, worried about the bills accumulating on the kitchen table. As she prepared her afternoon tea, one of the few luxuries she still allowed herself, Margaret let her gaze wander out the window. Outside, the world went on its course, indifferent to her troubles. Children played on the sidewalk, their cheerful laughter contrasting with the oppressive silence of the apartment. For a moment she felt a pang of envy for that carefree joy. Margaret hadn't always been like this. There was a time when her heart overflowed with love and hope. She married young, full of dreams for the future. But life, unpredictable as ever, had other plans. Her husband suddenly passed away after just 5 years of marriage, leaving her alone to face the world. The loss was devastating, and Margaret felt as if a part of her had died along with him. In the years that followed, she devoted herself to work, seeking to fill the void in her heart with long hours at the department store where she was a manager. Time went by, and Margaret watched her parents age and pass away, one loss after another. Each blow hardened her a little more, as if her heart was turning to stone to protect itself from further pain. It was during this time that Margaret stopped praying. The words that once flowed easily in conversations with God now seemed empty and meaningless. Why pray, she thought, if no one is listening? The faith that once sustained her had faded away, leaving only a bitter void in its place. Now, retired and alone, Margaret faced a new battle, the bills piling up and the retirement income that barely covered her basic needs. She looked at the stack of envelopes on the table, knowing that inside them were more charges and overdue notices. It was in that moment of despair that her eyes landed on the previous day's newspaper, still open to the classifieds page. One ad in particular caught her attention. Nanny wanted for 8-year-old boy. Flexible hours, good pay. Margaret hesitated for a moment. It had been years since she last dealt with children, and the idea of caring for a boy at this point in her life seemed absurd. But necessity spoke louder. She picked up the phone and dialed the number listed in the ad. The voice on the other end belonged to Helena, a lady with a gentle voice who explained the situation. Her grandson, Davy, had recently lost his mother and needed special care due to his fragile health. The grandparents, already elderly, needed help caring for the boy while dealing with grief and daily responsibilities. Something in Helena's voice touched Margaret, and before she could think much about it, she found herself agreeing to an interview for the next day. The following morning, Margaret found herself in front of a large, well-kept house in a quiet neighbourhood on the outskirts of the city. The front garden, with its colourful and well-trimmed flowers, starkly contrasted with the simplicity of her own home. For a moment, she felt out of place, as if she didn't belong in that setting. Helena greeted her at the door with a warm smile that immediately calmed Margaret's nerves. The inside of the house was welcoming, decorated with family photos and objects that clearly told a story of several generations. However, there was a shadow of sadness hanging in the air, as if the house also felt the recent loss. "Davy is in his room," explained Helena, guiding Margaret down the hallway. "He's been spending a lot of time there since, well, you know." Her voice faltered a bit, and Margaret felt a wave of empathy. She knew all too well the pain of loss. Upon entering the room, Margaret encountered a scene that took her by surprise. Davy, a thin and pale boy, was sitting by the window looking at the sky with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. When he turned to look at her, Margaret saw in his eyes a mix of deep sadness and a light she couldn't explain. "Hello, Davy," she said softly. "I am Margaret." The boy studied her for a moment before responding. "Did you come to take care of me?" There was something in his voice, a maturity and acceptance that Margaret did not expect from such a young child. "Yes," she replied. "If you want." David nodded slowly. "All right, but you need to know one thing." He pointed to the sky. "My mother is up there, on the brightest star. She watches over me every night." Margaret felt her heart tighten. The unwavering faith of that boy, even in the face of such a great loss, caught her off guard. For a moment she didn't know what to say. Helena intervened gently. "David has a very special connection with the stars. His mother used to tell him stories about the constellations to help him sleep." In the days that followed, Margaret gradually adapted to the routine of the house, and more importantly, to the presence of Davy. The boy, despite his fragile health, had an insatiable curiosity about the world around him, especially about the night sky. Margaret found herself learning more about stars and planets than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, while helping Davy with his physiotherapy exercises in the garden, the boy suddenly stopped and looked at her seriously. "Margaret, do you think my mum can see me from here?" The question caught Margaret by surprise. Her first instinct was to say no, that people who leave cannot see us. But something stopped her. Davy's hopeful gaze, the way he clung to this belief, made her reconsider. "You know, Davy," she began slowly, "I'm not sure. But if your mother's love was as great as it seems to be, I believe that somehow she finds a way to look after you, even from afar." Davy's face lit up with a smile, the first Margaret had seen since she started working there. "I knew it. That's why I always feel better at night when the stars appear." At that moment, something changed inside Margaret. The unwavering faith of that boy, his ability to find comfort and hope in something as vast and mysterious as the starry sky, touched a part of her that had long been dormant. Days went by, and Margaret noticed a gradual change in Davy. The boy, once reclusive and downcast, began to show more energy and enthusiasm. He spent more time in the garden, exploring plants and insects with Margaret, and at night spent hours talking about the constellations he loved so much. Davy's grandparents watched this transformation with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. One afternoon, while Davy was playing in the garden, the grandfather pulled Margaret aside. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done," he said, emotion clear in his voice. The doctors had started an experimental treatment a few months ago, but they said it would take time to see results. "It seems to be working better than we expected." Margaret smiled, feeling a wave of affection for the boy who had entered her life so unexpectedly. "Davy is a very special boy," she replied. "I think sometimes the best medicine is having someone to talk to and play with." That night, as they watched the stars together, Davy turned to Margaret with his eyes shining with excitement. "I have an idea. What if we sent a message to my mum?" Margaret hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond, but Davy's excitement was contagious. "And how would we do that?" she asked, curious. "We can make a balloon," exclaimed David, "a big balloon that rises to the sky, carrying our message." The idea was so simple and at the same time filled with hope that Margaret found herself agreeing before even thinking about the implications. In the days that followed, they worked together on the balloon project. Margaret taught David how to make origami, and together they created dozens of small paper birds that would be attached to the balloon, each carrying a message of love and longing. The day chosen to launch the balloon arrived, coinciding with a cloudless night, perfect for stargazing. The grandparents joined them in the garden, all feeling the excitement of the moment. David held the balloon carefully, his eyes fixed on the sky above. "Is it ready?" Margaret asked softly. Davy nodded, a mix of anxiety and hope on his face. "Do you think she will receive it?" Margaret felt a lump in her throat. Just a few weeks ago she would have dismissed the idea as childish fantasy. But now, seeing the pure faith in Davy's eyes, she couldn't deny the beauty of that moment. "I'm sure she will," she replied, surprising herself with the sincerity in her own voice. Together, they released the balloon. It rose slowly, the small paper birds dancing in the night breeze. Everyone watched in silence as the balloon grew smaller and smaller until it was just a point of light among the stars. Suddenly, the sky lit up. A meteor crossed the night, followed by another and yet another. It was a meteor shower, a rare and stunning spectacle that none of them expected to see. Davy let out a shout of joy. "Look, Margaret! It's Mum responding." Margaret looked at the sky, amazed. Rationally, she knew it was just an astronomical coincidence. But at that moment, seeing the pure happiness on Davy's face, she felt something stir within her. A warm and comforting sensation she hadn't felt in years. The grandparents hugged Davy, all emotional with the moment. Margaret stood a little apart, observing the family scene with a mix of joy and a pang of longing for her own lost family. It was then that he felt a little hand grasp his. David looked at her, his eyes shining with tears and joy. "Thank you, Margaret. I knew she was listening." In the days that followed, Margaret noticed a change not only in David but in herself as well. The walls of her heart, long built to protect herself from pain, began to open. She found herself smiling more, appreciating the small joys of daily life that previously went unnoticed. One afternoon, while watching David play in the garden with an energy that seemed unlikely a few weeks before, Helena approached her. "You know, Margaret," she began softly, "when we hired you, we expected someone to care for David. But I think you brought much more than that to our family." Margaret felt the tears form in her eyes. "Actually, I think it was Davy who took care of me," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. That night, as she returned to her small apartment, Margaret was surprised to find herself looking up at the sky. She wasn't searching for Davy's mother's star, but rather contemplating the vastness of the universe with a new sense of wonder. Sitting in her worn-out armchair, Margaret closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, felt the urge to pray. The words came hesitantly at first, an almost inaudible whisper. I don't know if I still know how to do this," she began. "It's been so long. But if you're out there, if you can hear me, thank you. Thank you for Davy, for showing me that there's still light in the world." As she spoke, Margaret felt as if a weight was being lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't a dramatic change. There were no heavenly lights or miraculous revelations. It was something more subtle, more profound. A feeling that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she thought. Every time she went to work at Davy's house, she felt renewed. The boy continued to improve, his health strengthening day by day. "It's a miracle," the doctors said, unable to fully explain the rapid recovery. But for Davy, the explanation was simple. "It's my mother taking care of me," he said with conviction. "She always did, Margaret. And now she has sent you to take care of me too." Those words touched Margaret deeply. She, who had felt without purpose for so long, now saw the impact her presence had on that family's life. And more than that, she saw how Davy and his unwavering faith had impacted her own life. One night, while they were stargazing together, David turned to Margaret with a serious expression. "Margaret, do you think people can be angels?" The question caught Margaret by surprise. "What do you mean, David?" "Well," he continued thoughtfully, "my mum always said that angels were God's messengers, sent to take care of people. And you take care of me, make me feel better. So maybe you are an angel." Margaret felt her heart fill with emotion. "Oh, David," she said softly, "I'm not an angel. I'm just an ordinary person who was lucky enough to meet a very special boy." Davy smiled, satisfied with the response. Maybe everyone can be angels to each other, if they try. At that moment, Margaret understood something fundamental. Her life had not been just about loss and loneliness. Each experience, each challenge had prepared her for this moment. To be here now, making a difference in the life of this extraordinary boy. In her small apartment, now decorated with Davi's drawings and a small telescope she had bought to observe the stars, Margaret knelt beside her bed. With tears of gratitude in her eyes, she began to pray. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky, "for giving me a second chance, for showing me that it is never too late to start over, to believe, to love." And that night, while the world slept, a star shone a little brighter in the sky, as if answering a long-forgotten prayer. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.